Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Leslie, we are going to have a presentation today on transparency and budgets. So here to tell us what that means and what we're going to observe. Nice layout, by the way. We can see you all.
Chairman Beard, Commissioners, thanks. And you'll probably note that today's was a little different than the three previous ones we had done, where it was on a department or a functional area, and you had some pretty specific data regarding that portion of the county and the services we provide. The one here is on transparency, and it's really to focus on one of your results maps about funding we receive or decisions we make and where we invest things as an organization. And Michael and Steve Jones kind of took the lead in this, and I think did a good job of bringing some areas together and some data together. And we're really here today to hear back, focusing at the end of it a lot from you on, is this the right information? Is it the right format? Even part of what you were talking about there in your updates about data that might not be accurate or correct, and how do we get the right information out there as part of our communications, is the type of thing that we're looking for you. So is it the right type of information? Is this what your constituents are interested in hearing? The format, is there a better way to show it? Does this format work? And Michael even went above and beyond and did some research in where the Citizens League has talked about transparency and engagement, and even some of our state statutes that don't appear to support getting good public involvement or the timing of that. So are there things we want to explore that way? So with that, I will introduce your questioning panel, and then the folks that are going to provide us some information and on the data and what they've put together. So Leslie Vermillion, the Deputy County Administrator.
Pam Selvig, Health and Human Services Director.
Brad Davis, Planning Manager.
Jake Grusing, Library Director.
Michael Thompson, County Assessor and Property and Taxation Services Manager.
Scott Gettle, County Controller.
Steve Jones, Principal Financial Analyst.
Lisa Kohner, Public Affairs Coordinator.
And with that, we'll turn it over to the panel to give us a few-minute update on what they've put together. We'll ask some questions. We'll turn it over to the audience for some questions, and then back to the board.
Well, I'll kick it off that, as it's been stated, we're here to discuss transparency and budgeting. And there's many important reasons on why we should cover this topic. But as you probably saw within the documents that were provided, one of the most important reasons is probably the citizen rating of the value of services provided for the taxes paid for the last 13 years has been very low across Scott County. So we really need to do a better job of making the taxpayers, or our citizens, feel like they're getting good value for the services that we provide. And it's extremely problematic for Scott County because property taxes provide over 50% of the funding for our operations. So we need to get a better feeling from our citizens in that regard. Now, we have taken steps to improve transparency and what we provide for services. So over the past many years, we've had Delivering What Matters, and it really started the discussion of programs and outcomes and key performance indicators and what are we doing for the public and what services are we providing. Along with that, we had Scott Delivers here that was created, which really shows how is a program doing towards meeting its outcomes, how are the key performance indicators, and how do they meet against the targets that they've established. Now this helps, especially now that the public can view this program, they can get a better understanding of our programs so they know what services we offer and how does it benefit them. Other steps that we've taken is we really researched how can we be more transparent in budgeting. And through that research, we found priority-based budgeting. And we took some training through an outside resource that provided a template for us to use for priority-based budgeting. And with priority-based budgeting, it really allows us to prioritize our programs based on how impactful those programs are at meeting the Scott County goals of safe, healthy, livable, and responsible. Along with priority-based budgeting provides the costing, the revenues, and the FTE amounts for these programs to really provide a lot of information now about our programs. In addition to the priority-based budgeting, a few years ago, we also implemented OpenGov on our website. This allows our citizens now to go out to our website and view our actual and budget information and drill from a fund to a division to a department level on our financial information. So we really are trying to be more transparent with our data. Future steps that we're looking to take, along the lines of priority-based budgeting, we're really working on a program profile report. It's a one-page report, front and back, for each one of our programs, and it'll provide the program name, a program description, the individual scores on how that program impacts individual results of Scott County, the costing, the revenue, the FTE number, but also the outcome and the key performance indicators for those programs. So we really believe this is going to provide a lot more information for not only the decision makers throughout the organization, but we'll also have it available on our website so that our citizens can also see additional information and see what does Scott County provide and what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve from these programs. Another item that Judith Brumfield's working on is a performance report. This is going to highlight programs throughout the organization and show how have they impacted the community and what are they looking for outcomes and stories of the individual programs. So this will provide more information, again, for the decision makers, but it will be provided to the public maybe more at the website level to read. But then we also have a group working on a people's report. This will be a summarized version of the performance report. Again, it'll tell stories about what our programs are achieving, and it'll truly get to show the citizens, here's what you're actually receiving for the taxes you provide to us. And we find this to be beneficial because we feel our rating is low right now. It's more based on our citizens not knowing the programs. They don't realize how our services do impact them. So to get our message out will be very valuable for us. And from that, we realize we have great stories to share, we have great programs, we have great services, so we really need to get our message put out to the public for that. And just in finance alone, as you may have seen in our materials here, we had a credit rating done a few years ago by Standard & Poor's, and we were rated at the highest level you can get for our credit rating. That's not just based on our financial information, but also our policies, the economy, and multiple other items. But it's a good story to show. We also, our fund balance, since 2009, our fund balance has increased every year since 2009, which means our revenues have exceeded our expenses, it's a great message that the public can be assured that we take great care in the funds that they provide us. Now, going back to one of my first points, property taxes plays a large role in our budget when it accounts for over 50% of our operations. And now Michael Thompson is here to cover property
Thanks,
taxes.
Steve. As Steve mentioned, 52% of the operating budget for the county comes from property taxes, so it's a big player in this discussion. When we talk about budget, we don't want to only focus on where the money's going, but also where is it coming from. And that's why I took on more of a leadership role with this group. And before meeting with this group, my focus has been only on property taxes. So through these discussions and some of the outcomes that we looked at on the last page of the narrative, giving some ideas as to maybe where we can do better within the county, bringing different groups together and some things that we can focus on to hopefully become more transparent with the public. One of the things that came up earlier in your board meeting was Scott County's name gets attached to a lot of different entities, and sometimes we get credit for things that we really aren't involved all that much with. And so having spent years kind of on the front lines, taking thousands of calls when those property tax notices go out, I can tell you that some of the materials that I put in to try and illustrate where those property tax dollars go is directly a result of there is a misunderstanding sometimes as to the county's role. As our name goes on the notice and we collect, they send their check to us, and then it gets redistributed back out, and we really keep one of the smallest portions, depending on what jurisdiction you happen to live in, of that total bill. So I think that's part of getting the message out. In some of those calls, we would get complaints about the school, or I don't have kids, we don't use the schools, I don't know why we have to pay for them. And you're not even talking to the school, you're talking to me, a county employee. So I think that there's a lot of work we could do with that. And then I think a timely event was the release of the Citizenly report on truth and taxation. That's another process that our department is heavily involved with. So every year we get preliminary levies from the different entities. We send out proposed tax notices in November based on kind of where they're coming in at. And then there is a number for those different entities listed out where they can call or attend a meeting if they want to learn more about their budget, that particular entity's budget. But that's about the extent of how far we go to show where those dollars are going and give them an opportunity to weigh in. And that's by design through the state mandated processes. So I think the Citizenly report gives a lot of insight into how people feel. They interviewed a lot of people from different players in that process, where there's some holdups, where there's some room for improvements, some of which we could do on our own as a county with additional efforts and resources, others which we would have to take to a lobbyist or try to get laws changed. So I think that's kind of the summary of how I feel like property taxes really fits into this discussion. And I think that this discussion will go broader. After this initial meeting, we're hoping this is a starting point. It's what we came up with through a number of discussions as to how we can work better together, not just by submitting our program information to somebody in finance, but to have discussions about what we're doing individually, what's the impact, should we be doing more of that kind of thing, and taking some initiative. So that's our jumping off point. This is our starting point, and we look for direction, and we're happy to answer any questions that the panel and board may have.
All right, panel, it's all yours.
Leslie, before the panel starts, maybe it's just for my own edification, but I'm thinking if I'm wondering this too, the other commissioners might be. Talked about the citizens rating being low. Can you, and maybe you did, but would you, again, indulge me? What were the questions? Who did we ask? What were they saying? Was there a lot of written comments, or did we give them multiple choice, yes, no, 1 to 5? What did that look like?
So let's let
What are we
Lisa, so
concerned about
it's
here?
page 19
In
on
the
page
book here?
19. And that's a good one to start with.
Absolutely. Mr. Chair, panel members, what you'll see here on this is a graph of the citizen rating of the value of services for the taxes paid in Scott County. And you're correct, it was a Likert scale, so it's a one, from poor to excellent.
Okay.
Is basically the rankings. There is a section at the end that asks people to submit any kind of further comment that they might want to add that wasn't specifically addressed or specifically addressed through the questions. And there were a number of those that dealt with taxes as well.
So this is one where we've ranked though below our peers, correct, Lisa?
Absolutely, yes. This is one where we rank below our peers. And we also rank lower than our peers in the ratings that the job Scott County government does at managing tax dollars.
Wow.
Which is page 20.
Which is page
Yeah.
20.
And so from the citizen survey, that is two of the questions that have been the most troubling, I think, as we've looked at this now and benchmarked it. It's been consistent. And compared to our peers, when you look at professionalism, responses, quality of service, we rank well above. But these two, we've ranked below.
And as we've discussed previously, taxes continues to be the number one problem identified in the citizen survey. 37% of respondents said it was the primary problem that they see in their community, which was far and ahead more significant than what you saw in some of our partner counties. It's a tax-sensitive community.
Thank you. That gives us some context now to listen to the rest of your discussion. Thank you. Commissioner Ulrich, one.
Well, even in the presentation so far, there was some good news that a resident could take differently than being good news. The statement was made that since such and such year, our fund balance has gone up.
Yeah.
Well, that maybe sounds like good news, but then someone will think or say, wait a minute, then you're taxing too much, and you should be taxing less. If your fund balance is going up every year, you're taxing what you don't need. So the question, what needs to be communicated then on that issue is, what's a healthy and an unhealthy fund balance, and how does that play into our AAA rating? And you know, you might point out the state has established what is a target for a healthy fund balance, you know, and what it's an excessive fund balance, and you know, they've given us targets so that we should be within parameters on a fund balance. So I mean, there's just, you know, we got to all be careful that we give more information than less on, especially something like that.
So Steve, why don't you explain page 9 to us? That's a great jumping off point here to ask a question.
While he's doing that, I want Lisa to be thinking about how we make this scintillating dinner table discussion. I think that's the issue.
I've got it all figured out, Mr.
You don't
Chair.
discuss this at dinner every night? Come on.
So page 9 shows our fund balance from 2009 through 2016. And the shaded area in green is what the Office of the State Auditor recommends for a healthy fund balance for county governments. Now, county governments need a larger fund balance than city governments because county governments rely significantly on property taxes. And since we don't receive our property taxes until May to June, we really need to get through the first 5 months of the year on the fund balances that we have at year end. So that's why the state auditor recommends a fund balance level of 35 to 50% of our expenditures. And even in 2016 now, even after the increasing fund balances each year, we're sitting at a fund balance of 43%. So we're still well within a guideline that the Office of the State Auditor recommends for a fund balance level.
In 2009, then, we would not have been?
2009, we were short of the target.
What happened that year in 2009, and how did we recover from it?
We actually had some difficult years up to 2009. So you may not recall, but we had different cuts to our county program aid and other program cuts that impacted us some in our fund balance because we needed to make structural changes. So it took a little while to make the structural changes, so our fund balance took some hits up front, but then we got the structural changes made and our fund balance recovered. And what's really significant about this is just think about how the economy has been over the past 8 years. And you think of a rainy day fund, but we actually were able to survive that and stay at a nice level of fund balance for our continued operations. And it's also good to have a decent fund balance in case there are emergencies. We've had our flooding issues, and we have to go back to our general fund to provide that immediate funding in those instances.
Go
I
ahead,
switch-
Jake. Pam, go ahead.
Can I switch gears just for a minute? I think these questions would be directed primarily at Michael. First of all, just a question on page 11, just so I'm clear, and then I wanted to follow up with some page 13. but the County Board of Equalization in June, what is that? And how does that impact?
So that is the final step in what's considered your first appeal opportunity. We send out your actual tax statement and value notice in March. The value notice that'll impact your taxes in the following year, so in this example for 2018, is appealable at that time. You can call us informally, we'll discuss it and maybe make a change. Then you have the opportunity to go to your local level and appear before either the township board or city council if they hold one. And then the final step in that process, outside of tax court, filing that lawsuit, is to come here to the County Board of Appeal and Equalization in June, which is an appointed board by the county commissioners. And currently the makeup, I believe, is 3 appraisers, 1 real estate agent, and 1 other person who's familiar with the local market through property financing. And so they're really a panel of experts on property value. They all live within the county and they do business within the county. So it's really a third party, an outside look at, did we do a good job if we weren't able to resolve that concern before?
So then in reference to page 13, are I have a couple questions on this. Are these the appeals that go to that board then? Do these appeals go to that board?
These, we only attempted to identify appeals that were made to our staff informally for a couple of different reasons. Different boards may impact the survey results and they may be telling us a different story that might be good to know, but we may not control over changing some of those experiences. So we attempted to only utilize informal appeals in this survey that did not go to a city, township, or county board subsequently, but some may have because we didn't have a perfect way of eliminating that 100% from that data.
So one piece of information I think that might be helpful here is what numbers are we talking about? Because I think it would tell a very, very different story. So obviously, so kind of back to the first kind of discussion around people not, it certainly seems that like their appraised value is going to impact how they might feel about the taxes they're paying. So are we in fact, so if that appeals where a change was made, if that number was 100, that tells me a different story than if it was 10, as well as the second slide, the number which we didn't make, because clearly those people weren't as happy, which I get. But what kind of numbers are we talking? Are we talking 100 people? Or properties? 200? Are we talking 10? I mean, that really tells a different story.
Yeah, thank you. You're right, that would tell a totally different story, and we do track that data. So we have about 58,000 parcels within the county, and we get 600 to 700 calls after we send out notices every year. We don't consider 600 to 700 all of those calls to be appeals. So a lot of times it might be explaining that timeline. It might be maybe sharing some sales over the phone that we have on hand and eliminating the concern once they understand maybe how the process is designed. And it doesn't result in an appeal. Of the 600 or 700 calls, maybe a few hundred of those will be considered appeals. And so you're looking at, less than 0.5% or less than 1% of the property that even initiates this process. So we could also look at that and say, well, 99% of the people think it's fair, but that's not necessarily true either. So of those, I don't have a breakout on last year or this year currently how many of the actual appeals had changes, but by the time we get to that level, there's a stronger likelihood that something should be changed because they've identified something, they've called, it wasn't resolved over a phone call, and then we're doing some additional analysis. So I I would guess that probably 60 to 70% of those end up having a change. Of the
Michael,
ones that are considered appeals.
Of those couple hundred, let's say, that are appeals, how many end up going on to a different board? So they can appeal to the city, they can appeal to the township, or they can appeal to the county? How does that play out for folks?
Very small amount, and usually the people that show up at the local boards of appeal, and I guess maybe not usually, but probably half of those people never even called us to attempt an informal appeal. They saw the date on the notice and they show up. So that would also present a challenge with trying to identify how many purposely took it to the next level, but I would say last year, all of our local boards combined would have had maybe 20 to 30 appeals go, and the county board, I believe, had one in June. One appeal.
So you said a department mailer survey. Do you guys send out a survey then to everybody that or not sure what that is?
Yeah, so, you know, I guess back to this measure, we really are trying to figure out, since this is such an important part of the process in property taxes, if you do exercise it, do you think it's fair? And we didn't try to split it out between, well, did you have a change made or not, to give us like an out and say, well, of course they're gonna be mad if we didn't change it. We used it to set two separate baselines. So this is 1 year, and the idea is you will see more years added every year. This was the first year we did the survey. And it came out of these programs and key performance indicators. And so we want to set that baseline for no change made. And if we say no change next year, we want to hopefully use better information, communicate better with the taxpayer, make sure that their questions were answered. We asked some other questions in the survey about, do you feel like you learned anything about the property taxation process throughout your appeal and things like that, and we get a little bit better rating than the fairness if there was no change made. But the goal would be is, even if you didn't get a change made, we want 100% of people to say we still thought it was fair at least. And it is possible, and it's happened, and obviously in this case, or this particular year of data, it's not the best response that we would have hoped for a lot better. But it is a mailer survey, so we think pay a couple $100s to get, in this case, I think it was like 220 cards printed. We put a stamp on each and we mail them out, and it's just a kind of a quarter page that they can answer 3 quick questions through check boxes, put a narrative comment if they want to, and just stick it in the mailbox. And I think we got over half of them, well, maybe it was like 30 to 40% of them back. So it was a very good response.
Just one kind of final up question. You talk about mass appraisal techniques. Does this appeal process, does it in any way inform the reliability of your mass appraisal techniques? Or do you feel like that's just not even relevant?
It could. We have had in the past where we've had more than one appeal coming in from an area, and it kind of looks like a pattern.
Right.
And in a case where maybe we found that something wasn't intended, we have said, okay, we should actually take all 18 of these properties in this building or condo or in this neighborhood and relook at it and send out a revised notice to correct that error for everybody. So, and then we would obviously take that into consideration as we move forward with future assessments. How did that happen? How can we prevent it from happening? Was it a modeling issue or a data entry type of issue? So yeah, it can be informative on our mass appraisal accuracy.
Thanks. Jake?
I have can we go back to page 19? On this rating, over the last decade and a half, what else do we know about that? Can we see tabulations by duration of residency in the county? Can you break it down demographically or by district? what else do we currently know about the rating and how that shakes out?
Absolutely. Jake, they are broken down by commissioner district, and that's readily available online. I also have that information here. We have some general indications as to how people feel more positively versus less positively about the value for services paid. And generally speaking, people that are more resistant to taxes tend to be older and have lived in the county more than 10 years. Well, some of the newer residents tend to be much more positive.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
So you have this piece of information, you have some other things that come out of the survey. What else would you like to know about, especially to me, those people who don't see the value the same way some others do? What else would you like to know from that group?
I would like a complete psychography done, to be honest. Because I would really like to have a better understanding of what seems to be some inconsistencies from what we observe in terms of facts versus perception. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
I have a question on page 6. I like the data where you broke up the dollar bill and showed where the funding is coming from. The question I had when I looked at this is, historically, would this breakdown look the same 10, 20, 30 years ago? Has it always been pretty stable that 52% of our funding comes from property taxes?
As a county government, it's been pretty stable that property taxes is a very significant portion of the funding. Cities are a little different than counties, that they have a lot more utilities, that type of business where they charge fees out to their customers. Where county government, we don't have a lot of businesses in that regard. So property taxes have been a significant portion of our operating.
Over the years?
Over the years. I don't know if it's at these same levels, though. I'd have to go back and look at history, but I know it has been a large portion.
And one thing that surprised me reading this is that rating agencies find property taxes to be really important. That's a stable part of our funding. So when we look at the history of our credit rating over the years, I was just wondering if the percentage of our funding from property taxes has influenced those different ratings.
It does influence ratings, and that's where a Minnesota county will sit better than a lot of other municipalities across the country, because they see the advantage of how Minnesota's structured right now, that we set how much we need to fund our government, and then it gets allocated to as a tax, where other communities set what they call a mill rate, and that mill rate gets spread across property values. Well, that doesn't always equal what an entity needs for funding. So there's a lot more ups and downs in how their operations are, where they really do see Minnesota as being more steady for their funding, and they see property tax as being a very steady source of funding, because our collection rate over the course of 5 years is almost 100%. So they like any type of steady funding that an entity has.
Kind of a follow-up question to Brad's. On page 14, it talks about the property tax burden and residential versus commercial and that kind of thing. I was kind of curious, the county's put some emphasis on business development and commercial development in the last few years. Curious, do we have any? Does this look different than it did, say, 5 years ago in terms of the proportion that's residential versus the portion that's commercial? Have we seen a change based on some of our efforts?
It is a little bit different, but if you're talking within the last 5 to 6 years, it really wouldn't be all that different.
Okay.
And this
10 years, would it look?
10 years, you might start to see a little bit more difference, but I still think that generally speaking, from all the data that I've seen, going back at least to 2003 or 4, that's when you would probably see consistency going forward. And the data that I don't necessarily have access to prior to the big boom in residential development, would probably look a little different because a lot of that growth that was happening in the early and mid-2000s was heavily residential in nature, and there wasn't an equal amount of development for these other commercial industrial types, property types. And this data was intended to also illustrate that value doesn't necessarily equate to kind of tax burden. And so when you go from the estimated market value on the right, and then after you take out the impact of tax exemptions, credits, exclusions, deferments, all those kind of things, who's actually paying what share is kind of more illustrated on the left-hand side. And so you can see that agricultural shrinks almost in half primarily because most of that property within our county is having some of their value deferred through a Green Acres program, and they're paying on a lower tax rate on a certain amount of value if they have an agricultural homestead. So commercial increases quite a bit because they have a higher rate. And then everybody has to pick up the exempt portion that they're not contributing. Of course, any of the local government buildings and the Sioux community property that's in the trust and all of those types of properties, some nonprofits that you would drive by and might look like a multifamily house, they aren't paying any property taxes, but you wouldn't know that. Those are all picked up by the whole pool. So.
That's what the 10% is there, Michael, the exemptions?
Yeah, that's the 10% is the amount of estimated market value within the county that pays no property taxes.
Leslie, if I can ask a question, then I'm going to go to Commissioner Wolf. Michael, that commercial tax, that does not include the statewide business property tax in this config?
No, these are...
these are only what we collect. For our
correct. On the
purposes.
left-hand side, only the county portion of the property tax bill is being represented.
Only the, thank you. Commissioner Wolf.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, so the exempt, that could be the tribe also in there?
Yeah, correct. The tribe has a lot of property in the county, some of which is in land trust, federal, which doesn't pay those property taxes. And they also hold a lot of land and properties that are not exempt.
Okay. They're paying it, okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Ulrich has a question also, or comment.
This is more of a overarching kind of question. Started off this talking about transparency and being more transparent, which sounds like good news, but the shadow side of that is, what have you been hiding? You know, and I don't think we've been hiding anything. And I don't know if it's really a transparency issue. I think it's a communication issue. I mean, all our budget meetings have been open and public, and people can sit in, and the reporters have, and it's been an open process, and it is an open process. But we need to identify what we need to communicate and be really strategic about that. I mean, for example, I heard a recent story of a person had a piece of property, and they're complaining about the assessed value being too high. They paid more than the assessed value when they bought the property. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if they, you know, did you know on the scene of, did you know that property assessed value is intended and should be, according to law, 95 to 105, now correct me if I don't have this exactly, 95 to 105% of the value. Is that right, or is it off a little?
The median has to be between 90 and 105, so
okay,
very close.
90 and 105. Okay, I knew I was probably going to be a little bit off. But that'd be helpful for people to know that, you know, the old days where your assessed value used to be, you know, really, you know, almost half, or, you know, there was a time where they didn't really reflect much reality in this assessed value. Those are days gone by where the assessed value is supposed to be really close. That would be something to communicate, just as strategic. The same person complained that their taxes went up. Well, their value went up, so that affects your taxes going up. And and their taxes went up at a higher rate than, they were on a lake shore, and the lake shore was going up higher than the general community, and so that also affected. So, we used to have a video by Clean Needles that there was 14 different things or something like that affected property taxes going up or down. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And we probably should watch that again here. But I think it's a communication issue rather than a transparency, I think. Can you
And if I
respond to
might-
that?
If I might, Commissioner Ulrich, we know we have to do a better job of communicating the stories, the realities, and things like that. We've done plenty in the scene in the past. We have used various outreach methods to try to engage our citizens in this process, have not been terribly successful in moving the dial. We haven't found the magic bullet yet, if there even one that exists, but we are exploring emerging technologies, better use of our Speak Up Scott County Forum. As you know, Center for Priority-Based Budgeting is affiliated with Peak Democracy, who works with us on that. Better use of YouTube and other kinds of social media platforms. There's a lot we can do that goes beyond the traditional, we're pushing information out to you versus I want to engage with you type of thing.
Michael, the commissioner raised, can you just explain page 12 for folks to?
Sure. Page 12 is an illustration of where our state board median ratios for countywide. It kind of gives you a high-level picture of where the level of assessment for different property type categories we're at. And residential, commercial, since 2007, so I guess starting with 2008 assessment, has been within the acceptable range, the 90 to 105%. And that's at a countywide level, but it also is at the individual jurisdictions have a similar analysis done for each property type. Say in the city of Shakopee will have a median ratio, and that's true for all of those individuals as well as this overview. And the importance of this really is what happens if we're not within the range. At that state board, the Department of Revenue can implement across the board increases or decreases to a class of property. And because the state board happens after basically the notices were sent and the appeals processes have concluded, if they do that, it's a notification that the assessed value that you were sent X months ago has been increased 10% because they were out of compliance. At that point, you're looking at Minnesota tax court appeal. So really disenfranchise the taxpayers, and so we are very vigilant with that median ratio to ensure that that doesn't happen.
I have two questions on this slide. One is how many sales are looked at to establish this relationship? And my second question is, do you track similar data for egg or vacant categories?
So countywide, the amount of sales that go into the study, I want to say last year was slightly over 2,000. So there would have been another maybe 1,000 that don't go into the study, and that's because they're maybe like a sale from a relative to another relative, or a court-ordered sale. Different reasons can impact whether or not it's considered an arm's length transaction. And the Department of Revenue gives us that criteria and double checks every sale after we've made a determination to make sure that we're doing it right. So within these categories, commercial, industrial, you're probably going to have maybe 30, 40 sales a year. The bulk of them are residential, and agricultural, you're lucky if you meet the threshold of 6 arm's length transactions a year. We've had years where we've been slightly over, but most years we're under, and that's why we don't even put the line on, because it would have so many gaps. It kind of ruins the flow of it, but it's also within the mandated ranges when we do have over 6 sales, as we did this last year.
I have a question, and we can go to page 1, I guess, on really the transparency and then participation. So Lisa, in response to Commissioner Orick's question, mentioned shifting from just pushing, and to me, that's a little bit of the transparency piece, that this is the information that we have, and I think with the measures that you've included here today, and in past Scott County Delivers and going forward, that data and that information will be less likely to require secret handshakes or decoder ring for the people to really understand what it is. It's not acronyms and government jargon. It's pretty clear, and we'll try to push that out there. And so kudos to you for making that more comprehensible, and we're trying to get that message out. But then you mentioned sort of engaging people, and in the joint program focus, it's respectful of the citizens when they're invited to participate in the budgeting process. And I'm wondering if that's, what do we really mean by that? How much do we want them to engage with us and participate? Is it to the level of citizens are on our peer review panels for priority-based budgeting, that they're really included in that process? So that's the first piece. How much do we really want them here to be present? And is it here, or is it finding them where they are? The second piece is, do we know anything around how much this is like a junior high dance? Where it's one thing to be invited to participate, and it's another thing to actually know some of the steps and to have somebody walk up and ask you to actually dance. So I don't know if you can take that sort of jumbled thought and give people a coherent answer to whatever it is I'm really trying to ask here.
I'm not going to touch the first one because in my position as public affairs coordinator, I'm always about 100% citizen participation. So that's kind of a given for me. In terms of the static information getting pushed out, our citizens say that they are we're about roughly average in terms of them feeling informed by the county and feeling listened to by the county. But again, we do have to get more into the engagement piece of that. And time again, we see that people just really don't want to come to a public hearing, public meeting. They're too busy, it's inconvenient. So the real push is to take this information and engage them where they're at and not expect them to come to us. And you're right, all politics is local. It's the same thing with your wallet, and people like to be asked. So that's just my perspective, but.
And we really would like to have the citizens engaged through multiple parts of the budget process. So we believe by first pushing out the program profiles to the public and having the people's report and also the performance report available to the public, we'll get a lot more feedback from the public as far as, yes, we're really happy with these programs and services, or no, these programs and services don't fit the needs that I'm looking for. Here's what I'm looking for instead. We also engage the public to set up our result maps to really clearly define, here's the goals of Scott County, what does that mean to you, so that we can better align our programs to meet the needs that you're looking for. So we really do want to have them engaged throughout the process.
And that was my assumption, was that we did want them engaged, but then how do we make it an ongoing relationship, that it's not, we're going through a project right now and we'd really like to engage you, but we're always engaging them and always working with the people we're trying to serve. So thank you for those responses.
Steve, on page 21, you talk about PBB going online. And so it shows the quartile 1, which fit the results map the best. And we have data that the board will see in the performance report that through the survey, they still support the results maps we have pretty consistently. They show they still think we're on target there. How would a resident be able to access this and then be able to drill in ultimately if we achieve some of the things that we're talking about as an org?
One of the future enhancements we'd really like to be able to do is be able to have this not only as an online tool on the website where the citizens can go out there. And it's a great tool because each one of the blue horizontal lines going across, you're able to filter all of our data so you can really look at specific programs meeting specific criteria. So if you want to know how many programs are truly a federal or state mandated program, you can change the bar to be a 4 for mandate, and only the programs that are fully mandated will appear, and you'll get a listing of all those programs if you want them. What we would really like to do in the future is to be able to develop something where you could then click on that listing of programs and go individually into that program and get the program profile to display, and then maybe click into more further detail for that, the different areas of that.
So I'd be able to go like to page 22.
Yeah, and just keep feeding all the way through all the information. Granted, right now, there's nothing that exists for that, but if we could get links created within that online tool, we'd be able to get to this specific data then. And that really would help with the public to be more informed about each one of these individual programs. It's great in itself, seeing the online tool, because you can filter it so much, but to get to this level is even more important.
So they'd be able to see the key performance indicator and the outcome, and then ultimately even some of the supporting performance measures that we have ultimately that support what we're doing in that area.
That is the goal, but we're probably talking years down is the problem. It doesn't exist in our current system, but we would like to get to have hyperlinks and just ways to drill down into that detail. Right now, it's across multiple platforms. We'd like to be able to isolate it into one system.
How soon till the public would be able to see this online and be able to go out like they do OpenGov or something like that and be able to look at it?
We could make it available at any point. We need to have an ID created, and we could just create a standard Scott County guest ID, and they could go out and filter data if that's the direction the organization would like to go.
Can I ask a couple questions about page 16? I don't know who that is, if that's Scott or Steve, but can you help, just give me 101 on this and explain this to me? And I'm curious in particular, I certainly get the overall impact on the tax bill. I get the circle. Help me understand the little box to the right and what this is supposed to tell us.
Is that you, Michael?
Well, I think she went past me because she just understood the big picture, but she's inquiring of what's actually in an individual criminal justice box. And
Well-
I think it's the attorneys and the sheriff.
I understand. I understand who they are in those boxes, but explain to me how the overall tax bill, and I even get the 1%, and it needs a 3.7% county portion, because the county portion is only a portion of our overall tax bill. But how did people break down? When I look at the countywide budget, Health and Human Services is a pretty significant portion, larger than criminal justice, but yet they would have to increase their portion by 8%, where we'd only have to by 4%. So how does that?
What this is showing is, to the left, it's breaking down for all the taxes that a citizen pays. 27% of that amount is going to Scott County.
Yeah,
The
I
other
get that
entities
part.
are getting the other.
Yep.
So of that 27%, $910 is the county portion of it. Now, the taxes paid isn't based on your overall budget, but it's based upon how much tax do you need to support your business. So you take your expenses minus all the other revenues that we bring in. And Health and Human Services has a significant revenue stream of grants. So the federal and state grants really drive down the tax
The
need.
county levy, yeah.
So from an expense standpoint, Health and Human Services, yes, spends more than criminal justice, but criminal justice doesn't have as much outside funding as a Health and Human Services, so it is more reliant on the property taxes.
Thanks.
And we always, to go back to Brad's question on the credit rating and really focusing on property taxes, and that credit rating agencies really like that. As an organization, we still prefer outside funding sources more than we do property taxes. But from a rating standpoint, yes, that is a preferred funding source.
The question I had on this slide was the city or township portion. I thought there was such a disparity between city taxes and township taxes that how are you able to kind of lump it up into this 28%? I know this is an average, but I'm just thinking, wouldn't you have a circle like this if you were a township average residential home value, and then you'd have a different graphic if you were a city average residential home value?
Yeah, and that's kind of illustrated on page 15 in a way. But if you look at 16, and if you just pick a pie chart for the lowest taxed, unique tax district, and then took the highest and looked at that pie chart, yes, there would be a huge difference in where those percentages are. So what you see on 16 is just the aggregate. It's where every dollar that came in through property tax, where did it go? And that much, 41% of all of it went to the school, 28% went to the city or the township. And so it's an overview. So it is really just an average. So you're right, if you pie chart different areas, the shares will change. And page 15 is included for a couple of reasons. One is just to show you're having a different discussion with somebody in the same valued house in one area than in a totally different area depending on where they land in this. And this is influenced, the county portion is going to be basically the same in all these districts. But the school can change significantly. The city or township does change significantly. And this is the impact. So when you look at the highest rate on the average, the countywide average house, compared to the lowest, it's almost half. And so a lot of people are surprised, and we get a lot of questions about, hey, I was comparing tax bills with this person or that person, and we have about the same value house. How is it possible? And it could be within one city where you're just in a part of a special watershed district or something. And then the second smaller point, that the reason I included homestead versus non-homestead is I think it's slowly, the myth is going away, but I know that it used to have a much more significant impact on your annual property tax bill. And now, as you can see, it's not really all that much difference as to whether or not you're homesteaded. There's other benefits, so people want to do that if they qualify, but I wanted to show both scenarios.
All right, does the audience have some questions?
I have a question about the chart that showed, the pie chart that showed the county portion. Oh, thank you. A question, yeah, about that slide there. What would be the general government, that $100? I'm just wondering what goes into that portion?
What we included in general government there is office management and budget, employee relations, administration, and information technology. So more of the internal services, internal facing portions.
Thanks, Steve.
Welcome.
Other questions? Awfully quiet group today, huh?
Well, they're thinking about it. Can I ask one more?
Of course.
What struck me on page 1, and I don't know if I'm going to ask this very eloquently, in a way it kind of follows up on Jake's analogy of the dance thing, and I'm not going to come up with a great analogy. But when I look at kind of the continuous improvement part, the first part about priority-based budgeting, and a more inclusive budget process where the input of the public is taken into account during budget discussions. I'm just curious, kind of looking, I have a couple thoughts on it. One is when I think of the complexity of the Health and Human Services budget, not to mention kind of county-wide, the complexity, and even in areas where I think we've tried, like we have a requirement in our resource council that they have to approve our budget. Well, to be really frank, it in many ways is just a stamp of approval, just because the complexity of that budget is so involved, and to really think that we're gonna get a good buy-in in that, and sometimes, I think is a challenge for us, to say the least. So I would be looking to you, how do we better do that? And so what would your vision in that, in terms of what would that look like in 3 to 5 years? And how this might look different for us around that piece?
One way I really envision this being helpful for us is that through that program profile, we'll have the outcome statement, the key performance indicators, and we'll really see how is a program doing against its target. And some programs may actually be far exceeding their targets. And we may look at it and say, you know, should we keep providing the same level of resources that we are to this program? Because we're well exceeding this target. So we may look to see, now what would happen if we did drop down more to a target level? What is the impact to the program? And with that impact to the program, what's the impact to our citizens? And get their feedback before any decisions are made along those lines. But it really provides us more data to really filter out that type of a discussion. And then we're able to go directly to the public and get their input before any decision would need to be made. Does that help?
Go ahead, help me out here.
Well, to keep that analogy
Yeah.
going, so is it a little bit of teaching, helping the citizens learn the steps? So we're asking them to come in and participate, but even with the program profiles, to really give some of the citizens who do engage may need some support in navigating, even sort of a watered down version of the Health and Human Services budget. Somebody will probably have to spend time with them, bring them up to speed to be able to participate in that process to make it worthwhile for them and for the county.
Correct, and in that example, I was thinking more of the clients or the people directly impacted, that they would really know the program and really have good feedback for us as far as what are they getting because we are far exceeding targets and what would be the direct impact. So it is more of a target audience in that example, but still we'd be looking to the general public and what knowledge they have to our overall programs.
And I might add to that is really the primary driving force behind the People's Report initiative. Crow Wing County implemented theirs specifically online, only online, several years ago, and I know Dakota County now is following suit with the printed version. But that's really intended to help educate people about what the points of these services are, what the demand for these services are, what the value for these services, put a human face on it so that there's a broader understanding of this. And I believe that, Judith, correct me if I'm wrong, that initiative has been, is now being undertaken, and we expect to have the printed version out within a year or two?
Sometime this year.
Sometime this year. Oh, sorry,
Yep.
Brad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Steve, can I follow up on that just for a second? The point of priority-based budgeting, though, is not to ask citizens how much money we should spend in various areas. It more is to ask citizens what outcome you want, and then you go back to the experts about how to get there. And so, Pam, what you're saying is absolutely right. When we try to ask a citizen to understand where the dollars go and how many dollars should go, it's frustrating for them, it's frustrating for us, and it's doomed to failure. We've tried that again and again. What we've tried to do is ask the citizens, what do you want within your community? What's important to you? And if they say, we want to feel safe, we try to break that down. What does that mean? And then look back to the people who know the programs to figure out what do we need to do. Then we need to measure it and say, are we really doing it? And report that back to people and get that kind of input from them, which is really their contribution to the budget. Because then we can figure out where do we need to invest that money.
Chair, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you and the board then for questions and comments.
Leslie, thank you. I'm going to ask you for a favor. I want you to put that little safe, livable, and what? What are the
Safe,
three?
healthy, and
Safe, healthy, and livable?
Something, yeah, we can just put it right here on the inside the credenza. We can be reminded of that every time we
All right.
come here and take these seats and listen to the discussion, to remember what it is we're trying to deliver. And I apologize for my misnomer a little while ago, doing what's right. Of course, that's a good life philosophy. We're trying to deliver what matters, yes.
Yes, thank you for reinforcing our brand.
Yes, I mean, you put a lot of emphasis on the brand, and here I am monkeying around with it. My apologies, Lisa. Members, any feedback, any further questions? We kind of participated with you, because actually, I think we were pretty engaged here. When you show politicians charts of people who are not happy, we're focused. And so we were pretty focused. That was a great maneuver to start with that slide, Ms. Koner. So we kind of participated with you, but any concluding comments or remarks before we thank them for their service and wrap this up? Commissioner Beer.
I have one point of clarification. The timing is really good. Someone jammed a property tax statement in my face. And, well, what does this mean? What is the official definition of fiscal disparities? And where does that, we collect it because it's on the Scott County.
We don't keep it.
Right. So we collect it. Where do we export or write that check to? What is it? Where does it go? The official.
Who wants to take
We're
it?
Can we answer a simpler
I'll
question
try
like
to
the
give
meaning
you-
of life or something?
That was I had two. That was my second.
The meaning of life.
Since we could probably come back next month and just do fiscal disparities, I'll try to make it.
The cliff
short.
notes, Bertie. That's all I need.
So in the early 1970s, there was fiscal disparities created so that 40% of the added commercial industrial tax base going forward, anything that was added, 40% of it would go into a metro-wide pool. And then based on population changes and the value, the property value in relation to each, to population, it would be redistributed out. And the idea is we'll stop competition between counties and cities from trying to lure all the businesses in and then stealing some of the, or not stealing, but hoarding some of the local resources for roads and other things by doing it this way, so that we're sharing that added base amongst everybody, regardless of exactly where the development occurs, part of that base anyways. So the reason that I had two different charts for the average commercial bill is the one on page 17 shows what the actual tax bill looks like. And so there's a big misconception when we talk to commercial property owners, they say they need to get rid of fiscal disparities. I can't believe I'm paying money that goes somewhere else. It goes to some other county or city. And it's a misconception because we get a lot back, and some years more and some years less, and depending on individual communities, a city within Scott County might be a winner and another city within Scott County might be a loser. So what I attempted to do was to say with page 18 is if we took fiscal disparities out and then looked at how it, when it comes back, how it's reapportioned, so the actual dollars you're paying are actually still going to either the school, the city or township, or the county. If we were losers, we could add a piece to this pie chart which would say going somewhere else. If we were overall losers, we could do that. This particular year, we're overall winners. So I didn't add money that we're getting as a bonus of fiscal disparities countywide because it's not on their tax bill. So that wouldn't have been fair. But if it was losing, we could add that to the pie chart. So
we're exporting those dollars, but they're some number. It's never, is it ever zero that's coming back across the river?
not, I don't believe to my knowledge that we've ever got zero back.
Mr. Shelton, would you like to shed light on this subject, attempt to?
And I did. The purpose is to level the playing field when it comes to commercial and industrial tax base. And the reason that Scott County is a winner in fiscal disparities is because we have one of the smaller, as a percentage, commercial industrial tax bases in the area. Now, the changes from year to year, in the metro area, the changes from year to year, there are times where we may outpace in terms of percentages somebody else because our percentage is also based on a smaller actual base. But it is, you know, Michael was correct. It was enacted to keep us from trying to just arbitrarily lure a business from Washington County to Scott County just so that we had more commercial industrial tax base. The thought is you should try and lure businesses from other states and other areas here, but not compete against each other. But in order to make that happen, they spread the tax base, the commercial tax base back through the fiscal disparities pool. You asked where the dollars go. I believe they actually end up going to the Department of Revenue. They may go to Anoka County. I'm not sure which. I know Anoka County does the actual calculations. So by statute, they're the ones that every year take all the data and say, okay, here's the number. Here's the spread that goes back to every county. I think we do have some cities that are actual losers in fiscal disparities within the county. I think Shakopee is a loser when it comes to fiscal disparities. But overall, the county itself and most of our cities are winners.
And that's about as good an explanation you're going to get without investing 7 or 8 hours in somebody from the
That's now my
state
second
somewhere.
part was the meaning of life, so go ahead, Lisa.
We'll have to take that conversation offline.
No, and the second part is just less of a question, more of a, you know, whether it's transparency or communication. I mean, and this is a gross oversimplification, so I feel like every time I'm at this desk, I'm saying, give me grace. So give me grace on this. This is a gross oversimplification. But it feels like, and that may or may not be true, but that's a topic for another day. It feels like there's a group of taxpayers and tax users. And so part of what I want to try to accomplish is Michael and Cindy were at a meeting at a workshop in a town not too far from here. Gave it a great explanation of taxes. Once everyone picked themselves up off the floor and got their eyes opened back up again, because it was good. It was a lot. They don't understand. So how do we help taxpayers understand that, hey, you're not there for us, we're here for you. We're the county government, we're here for you. It's not the other way around, because I think the prevailing thought is that, hey, we're just batteries and we need to write our check. We're not tax users. Although personally, I called Prior Lake PD on Saturday morning, and guess what? They showed up. It wasn't not an emergency, so it was a few minutes, but it was not an emergency. I had to drive out of my driveway this winter. Guess what? My road was plowed, and it wasn't me doing it. It was so. That's why I'm saying it's a gross oversimplification, but the reality exists. Perception's reality that, hey, we're taxpayers. Help us understand. But we do this. Scott County speaks up, and maybe we do need to serve bacon. That might help. How do we better communicate that instead of saying, well, it's out there. The data's out there. It's on this website. It's over here. It's over there. And we're living busy lives. Help us understand. Make it easier. Tax users, again, oversimplification. Boy, things are communicated better. Perception. Tax payers, hey, help me understand. And then you're going to tell me, I'm still not going to understand, but I want to know you're in this, and I don't know why I'm just looking at you, but look, we're looking at all of us. If I had a mirror, I'd be looking at myself. Help me understand and know that you, Scott County, politics is local, are here for me as a taxpayer. I think that would go a long way. It is I say a 7th grade dance, in my analogy. We're stepping on each other's toes, but we're here for each other, you know? We want this thing to work. So just having that mindset or having something like this is really beneficial. And again, does my heart good because it's been ailing lately, not physically. So the more we can do to communicate that, the better. And sometimes we need to rethink and put ourselves in other people's shoes and help understand what they may be thinking. How can we better communicate that with them? So is it the numbers? I don't think people care. It is outcomes. People want outcomes. People want heads on pillows. We want outcomes. That's what we're about. I don't care about the numbers personally. What are we doing? How are we helping? How are things better? And how did my $1 bring me $2 in return? That's what we want.
Administrator Shelton.
And if I may comment on that, the entire purpose behind delivering what matters and Scott County delivers is exactly that. We want people to understand what it is we're doing with the dollars that we're given and what those outcomes are, but more importantly, how we're measuring them. How do we know whether what we're doing makes a difference or doesn't make a difference? In that general, this transparency piece is to try and, as best we can, because our taxing system is very confusing. Our tax statements are very confusing. People will look at it and say, why do you need $40 million in reserves? Or as Commissioner Ulrich commented, why are you building reserves every year? There are good rationales behind that, and what we're trying to do with these forms and bringing it to the board is to try and help to educate the public so they do understand. I did have a question on that topic for Steve, because he said we need a fund balance because 52% of our funding is actually property tax dollars, which we only get twice a year. We get half in May and half in November. But I also, and I just look for Steve to confirm it or not, 33% of our revenue is intergovernmental revenue for a total of 85, and almost all of our intergovernmental revenue comes in the second half of the year. It comes after July 1st, does it not, between July and December?
For county program aid, but for the Health and Human Services
Is that-
intergovernmental aid,
that throughout?
they'll get reimbursed monthly and
Okay.
quarterly.
But the rationale that behind our fund balance is to allow us to operate during times when we have very little actual revenue coming in. And the county board established a fund balance policy where we look to the state auditor for guidance. The county board established a policy of what should we hold for emergencies. And so we actually focus by our fund balance policy on the lower number. Generally the first part of May, so we're coming into where we will see the lowest dollars that we have, and what should we basically bottom out at? What do we need in reserve for those things where we have flooding, where we have some unreimbursed expense? And I want to say we're at about 5% for that. 5 or 6% is what we try and focus on, which is about $5 to $6 million is what we generally, when we hit rock bottom. So where you'll see in the slide, if you went to that slide that was on page 9, it shows that we have a fund balance of 43% between the two different funds. It totals out $40.3 million at the end of 2016. And a lot of folks would focus on that. The state auditor focuses on that. What do you need? That's how they get their 35 to 50% to function properly. By the middle of May, we'll be down to about $5 or $6 million in those fund balance, because most of our expenses between November and May are not paid by revenues coming in, they're paid throughout by our reserves. That's the rationale. And then, John, so that you realize that while we have been adding to that, it's actually very small and incremental. So if you look at 2016, we finished the year within about 1.3% of what we budgeted. So when you start talking about, an overall budget of about $150 million, to finish that at the end of 12 months, only 1.3% different than what was budgeted is actually quite good. And of course, we always want that 1% or 1.3% to be in the positive column, not the negative column.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Further comments before I make this a concluding comment and ask for adjournment? I'm noticing a couple things in my history of being around this representative government process, that when you're looking for feedback, advocates love to show up during the budget process and howl about master gardeners. And my colleague did an amazing job of turning out support for a master gardener program. The feedback from the taxpayers always comes after the tax statement comes out. Never during the budgeting process, rarely during the budgeting process. So you tend to get feedback from two different groups. The people who are interested and advocates at one time in the process, taxpayers at quite another time in the process. And it's a fact of life. We just have to work with it. So I thank you for your attention to this, for making a presentation that we were all pretty engaged in. And Lisa, again, my plea to you is find some way to make this scintillating dinner table discussion, and I think this will take care of the issue. Members, seeing nothing else for the good of the cause, I'll entertain the most famous motion of all.
So moved.
Well, there's a host by many and seconded by many. We are adjourned.